The memory Thifa Monologue single spotlight illuminates drive. Sarah Chen, mid-30s, standing center stage. She wears a lab coat over casual clothes. A thin scar is visible on her temple. She speaks directly to the audience. Sarah, you want to know? About memory? About what happens when you try to steal from your own mind? Let me start at the beginning. The real beginning. Not the sanitized version I've been telling myself for 6 months. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I used to believe I was a good person. Isn't that funny? How we construct these narratives about ourselves, these carefully edited highlight reels that make us the heroes of our own stories. It was brilliant, you see. Child prodigy turned neuroscientist. PhD at 24. Groundbreaking research by 30. The kind of success story they write about in magazines. I had everything. A prestigious position at the Neurotech Institute, unlimited funding, a team of the brightest minds in neuroscience, and Emma, my daughter Emma, 8 years old when this story really begins. Though she'd been alive for all 8 of those years while I was busy becoming someone important, you have to understand. The memory extraction technology wasn't born from evil intentions. It started as hope, pure, beautiful hope. We wanted to help veterans with PTSD, victims of abuse, people trapped in cycles of trauma. Imagine being able to reach into someone's mind and simply remove the source of their pain. Like editing a film, cutting out the scenes that don't serve the story. I spent years perfecting the process. The neural mapping alone took 3 years. We had to identify exactly where memories lived in the brain, how they connected to emotional responses, how to extract them without damaging surrounding tissue. It was like performing surgery on consciousness itself. The early trials were promising. Lab rats forgetting painful stimuli. Monkeys losing specific learned behaviors while retaining everything else. Clean extractions, no side effects. I was so proud of that work. So, sure, I was changing the world for the better. But then came the human trials. And that's where everything started to unravel. Our first volunteer was a woman named Margaret. 67 years old, haunted by memories of her son's death in Afghanistan. She'd been living with that grief for 12 years, and it was destroying her. Insomnia, depression, panic attacks. She begged us to help her forget. The extraction worked perfectly. Too perfectly. We removed the memory of receiving the news about her son's death, and with it went every memory connected to that moment. She forgot she'd ever had a son at all. 43 years of motherhood erased in 30 minutes. She was happy, though. Genuinely, radiantly happy for the first time in over a decade. And that's when I realized something terrible about myself. I didn't care that we'd stolen 43 years of her life. I cared that the process worked. Cared about the scientific implications, the Nobel Prize possibilities, the way her case would revolutionize our understanding of memory. Margaret became our poster child. We published papers about her recovery, spoke at conferences about our breakthrough. We never mentioned what she'd lost, only what she'd gained. Freedom from grief, we called it. Liberation from trauma. But I started noticing things, small things. Margaret would sometimes stare at photos of young soldiers in the newspaper with this confused longing, like she was trying to remember something just out of reach. She'd donated thousands of dollars to veteran support charities over the years, but couldn't explain why when we asked. Part of her knew something was missing, even if she couldn't name it. That should have been my warning. That should have been where I stopped. Instead, I became fascinated by the process itself. The way memories connected to each other, the ripple effects of extraction, the way the brain tried to fill in gaps with confabulation. I started documenting everything obsessively, mapping the changes in my patients' personalities, their relationships, their fundamental sense of self, and I started experimenting. Not maliciously, not at first. I told myself I was being thorough, scientific, but I began extracting memories that weren't traumatic. Happy memories, formative experiences, first loves, childhood adventures, moments of pure joy. I wanted to understand the full spectrum of memory's impact on identity. The patients never knew. They came to me broken, desperate, and I fixed their immediate problems while stealing pieces of who they were. A woman who'd lost her husband forgot their wedding day along with the car accident that killed him. A man who'd been abused as a child lost his memory of the abuse, but also of the grandmother who'd saved him from it. I kept the extracted memories in a special storage system I designed. Neural patterns preserved in crystalline matrices experiences. Trapped in amber. I told myself it was for research purposes, but the truth was simpler and more terrible. I was collecting them, you see. I discovered something extraordinary. The extracted memories weren't just data. They retained their emotional resonance, their sensory details, their power to make you feel Tao. And when you've spent your whole life pursuing knowledge instead of experience, when you've sacrificed relationships for research and human connection for career advancement, other people's memories become incredibly seductive. I started experiencing them myself late at night in my lab. I'd connect to the storage system and live someone else's wedding day. Feel their joy, their love, their certainty that this moment would last forever. I'd experience a mother's first glimpse of her newborn child, the overwhelming rush of protective love. That I'd never allowed myself to feel with my own daughter. Because that's the truth I've been dancing around, Emma. My beautiful, brilliant, desperately attention-starved daughter who I barely knew despite living in the same house with her for 8 years. I was a terrible mother. Not abusive, not neglectful in any legal sense, but emotionally absent in every way that mattered. One provided for her needs, ensured she was fed and clothed and educated, but I never really saw her. I was always rushing off to the lab, always taking calls during dinner, always more excited about my research than about her school play or her questions about why the sky was blue. Emma used to draw pictures of our family. She'd show them too. Me with such pride, and I'd glance at them while checking my phone, murmur something about how lovely they were, and pin them to the refrigerator without really looking. In every single drawing, she made herself tiny and me huge. But I was always turned away, looking at something else. She stopped drawing those pictures when she was 6, by the time she was 8. We barely spoke except for me to give her instructions or ask about homework. She'd learned not to interrupt my work, not to ask for stories at bedtime, not to expect me at her soccer games. She became this quiet, self-sufficient little ghost haunting our house, and I told myself that was normal. That was just how childhood worked. But children aren't supposed to be ghosts in their own homes. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always my longest days at the lab. I was working on a particularly complex extraction. A war veteran with severe PTSD, and the process was taking hours. My phone kept buzzing. Emma's school calling. I ignored it the first 3 times. The 4th time, I answered with barely contained irritation. Dr. Chen, FIS's principal. Martinez, Emma is still here waiting to be picked up. School ended 2 hours ago. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 6 p.m. I'd completely forgotten that Emma's after-school program had been canceled for teacher training. She'd been sitting alone in the school office for 2 hours, waiting for her mother to remember she existed. "I'll be right there," I said, but I didn't leave immediately. The extraction was at a critical stage. 5 more minutes, I told myself. Just 5 more minutes to complete the procedure. Those 5 minutes turned into 30. When I finally arrived at the school, Emma was sitting in a chair that was too big for her, swinging her legs and staring at the floor. She looked up when I walked in, and the expression on her face broke something inside me. Not anger, not tears, just resignation. The look of a child who'd learned not to expect better. "Sorry, baby," I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Mommy got caught up at work." She nodded like she'd been expecting exactly that excuse. "It's okay," she said, and the fact that she meant it made everything worse. That night, I stood outside her bedroom door listening to her talk to her stuffed animals. She was playing house, and in her game, the mommy animal always came home on time. The mommy animal made pancakes for breakfast and helped with homework and never forgot to pick anyone up from school. I realized then that my 8-year-old daughter was fantasizing about having a mother who acted like a mother. That's when I started thinking about the machine, about extraction, about the possibility of removing the guilt that was slowly eating me alive, the constant awareness of my failures as a parent, the growing certainty that Emma would be better off without me. I told myself I was being selfless. If I could extract the memory of that day, the shame and self-loathing it triggered, maybe I could be a better mother. Maybe I could start over fresh, without the weight of my failures dragging me down. But deep down, I knew the truth. I didn't want to be a better mother. I wanted to stop feeling guilty about being a bad one. The extraction process required weeks of preparation, neural mapping, baseline establishment, careful identification of the target memory and all its associated connections. I worked on it in secret after hours using equipment I'd modified, specifically for self-extraction. As I mapped my own brain, I discovered something horrifying. The memory of forgetting to pick up Emma wasn't isolated. It was connected to hundreds of other moments of maternal failure. Every missed bedtime story, every canceled weekend plan, every time I'd chosen work over her. They formed a network of guilt and shame that ran through my mind like a root system. I couldn't extract just one memory. I'd have to extract them all. And that's exactly what I decided to do. The night I performed the extraction, I sat in my lab surrounded by years of research, looking at brain scans of my own neural pathways. I'd identified every memory connected to Emma, every moment of motherhood I wanted to forget. The procedure would take hours and require careful precision to avoid damage to surrounding areas. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt relieved. Soon, I thought I'd be free. Free from the guilt, free from the constant reminder of my inadequacy, free from the weight of a relationship I'd never figured out how to navigate. I injected the neural inhibitor, attached the extraction apparatus, and began the process. What I didn't anticipate was the resistance. Memory isn't just information stored in the brain. It's woven into the fabric of who we are. And when you try to extract formative experiences, the mind fights back. It's the machine. Began pulling Emma-related memories from my neural pathways. My consciousness split to protect itself. Part of me wanted to forget, to be free from the pain of knowing how badly I'd failed her. But another part of me, some deeper self, recognized that forgetting Emma would be the ultimate betrayal. That erasing her from my mind would be worse than abandoning her in real life. The machine overloaded. Sparks flew. Emergency systems activated. And when I woke up 6 months later in a hospital bed, couldn't remember exactly what had happened. I knew something was wrong. The doctors said I'd had a severe neural trauma. Memory loss was expected, they said. Give it time, but it wasn't. Just memory loss. It was selective amnesia. I could remember my research, my techniques, my scientific knowledge. What I couldn't remember was Emma. Not clearly. I knew I'd had a daughter, knew something terrible had happened. But the details were fuzzy, dreamlike. I went home to an empty house. Emma's room was exactly as she'd left it, but I couldn't remember her living there. I found photos of us together, but looking at them felt like looking at pictures of a stranger. The woman in those photos who was holding a little girl and smiling looked like me. But I couldn't access the emotions behind those smiles. That's when I created the story about Emma's death. It was easier than admitting I couldn't remember my own daughter. The guilt I felt wasn't about causing her death, it was about erasing her life from my mind. But I couldn't tell anyone. That couldn't explain that I'd voluntarily forgotten my own child. So I let people assume she'd died in some terrible accident that was too traumatized to discuss. The months that followed were a nightmare of half memories and growing paranoia. I kept finding evidence of things I couldn't remember doing. Research notes in my handwriting about procedures I didn't recall performing. Patient files that had been altered with certain memories removed from their sessions that I had no recollection of extracting. I started experiencing blackouts, hours where I'd lose time, only to find myself in strange places with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My colleagues became nervous around me, shooting worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. That's when Marcus started asking questions. Marcus Rodriguez was my research assistant, a brilliant young neuroscientist who'd been working with me for 3 years. He'd been there the night of my accident, had been the one to find me unconscious in the lab. In the months since my return, he'd been watching me carefully, documenting inconsistencies in my behavior. "Dr. Chen," he said one afternoon, approaching my desk with a tablet full of data. "I've been analyzing the neural patterns from your accident. Something doesn't add up." I looked at the brain scans he showed me. Complex wave patterns, electrical activity mapping, synaptic response charts. "What am I looking at, Marcus?" "These are your brain scans from the night you were injured. Look at this section here." He pointed to a cluster of activity in the temporal lobe. "This pattern doesn't match neural trauma. It matches successful memory extraction." My blood went cold. That's impossible. The machine malfunctioned. Did it? Or did it work exactly as designed? Marcus pulled up another screen. "I've been reviewing the lab's security footage. There are gaps, Dr. Chen. 3-hour windows where the cameras were disabled. And they weren't disabled randomly. They correspond exactly 2 times when you were supposedly having blackouts." I stared at the data, trying to make sense of what he was showing me. "What are you suggesting?" "I think the machine worked perfectly that night. I think you successfully extracted memories related to your daughter. But I also think something else happened, something you're not telling me." That night, I went home and searched my house top to bottom. I found things I didn't remember buying: medical equipment, neural storage devices, vials of the same blue serum I'd used the night of the extraction. Hidden in my basement behind a false wall I didn't remember building, I discovered a room. That made my blood freeze. It was a replica of my lab, but more advanced. The memory extraction equipment was refined, perfected, far beyond anything we'd achieved at the Institute. Shelves lined the walls, filled with hundreds of crystalline storage vials, each one labeled with a name, a date, and a memory description. Margaret Patterson wedding day, June 15, 1982. David Kim, birth of first child. On March 3, 2019. Elena Rodriguez last conversation with mother. September 8, 2020. I was looking at a collection of stolen experiences, memories extracted from patients and preserved like butterflies pinned to a board. And every single vial was signed with my name, but I didn't remember any of it. In the center of the room sat a chair equipped with neural interface equipment. Next to it, a computer system more sophisticated than anything at the Institute. I approached. It was shaking hands and found it was still active. Running programs I didn't recognize. The main screen showed a video file dated from the night of my accident. I clicked play. The video showed me in this basement lab, but not the me I remembered being. This version of me moved with confidence, spoke with authority, and had eyes that were completely different. Cold, calculating, predatory. Day 847, she said to the camera, "The subject's resistance to full extraction continues, but I've made a breakthrough. Rather than fighting the protective mechanisms, I've learned to work with them. The conscious mind creates a barrier to prevent memory extraction. Fine, I'll extract the conscious mind instead." She turned to face someone off camera. "Bring in the next subject." A man was led into frame, clearly sedated. I recognized him as David Kim, one of our patients from 6 months ago. A successful businessman who'd come to us for help with anxiety following a car accident. "David here wants to forget his trauma," the other me continued. "But his brain is full of so many other interesting experiences. Successful business deals, family celebrations, moments of genuine happiness. Why waste all that richness when someone else could benefit from it?" I watched in horror as she connected David to the extraction equipment. But instead of removing traumatic memories, she was extracting positive ones: joy, love, triumph, connection, the emotional experiences that made life worth living. The beauty of this process, she explained to the camera, is that the subjects never realize what they've lost. They came here to forget pain, and they do. But they also lose the capacity for real happiness, for deep connection, for the full spectrum of human experience. They leave here functional but fundamentally diminished, and they never know why. The video continued for hours. Patient after patient brought in their most precious memories stolen and stored in crystalline vials. And through it all, this other version of me narrated the process like she was conducting a scientific demonstration. But the worst part was yet to come. Near the end of the video, she turned to the camera with a smile that made my skin crawl. Of course, the real breakthrough came when I realized I could extract memories from myself. The guilt, the shame, the inconvenient emotional attachments that were interfering with my work. I've been practicing on myself for months, removing little pieces of conscience, empathy, maternal instinct. It's remarkably liberating. She held up a vial labeled Emma Chen, Bedtime Stories Ages 3 to 7. This one was particularly difficult to extract. The neural pathways were deeply embedded, connected to primitive protective instincts, but I've persevered. Soon I'll have removed every trace of inconvenient parenthood from my mind, and I'll be free to pursue my research without distraction. The video showed her preparing for what I now realized was the final extraction. Not an accident, not a machine malfunction, but a carefully planned procedure to remove every memory of Emma from her mind. The only problem, she continued, is that this process requires a consciousness to receive the extracted memories. They can't simply be deleted, they need somewhere to go. So I've been storing them in a partitioned section of my own mind, a kind of psychological quarantine. But that partition is becoming unstable. The memories want to reintegrate, and the emotional trauma they contain is seeping through. She attached electrodes to her temples, the same setup I'd found myself in 6 months ago. Tonight, I'll extract the partition itself. Everything related to Emma, to guilt, to the inconvenient awareness of what I've become. I'll upload it all to the storage system and finally be free to become who I was meant to be. But something went wrong. As the extraction began, the other me started convulsing. The partition she'd created to hold Emma's memories began fighting back, trying to preserve itself. What she'd thought was just stored data was actually a separate consciousness. Part of her that still loved her daughter still retained some vestige of humanity. That's what I was. Not the real Sarah Chen, but the extracted memories of motherhood, guilt, and conscience that had been quarantined in her mind for months. When the machine overloaded, those memories downloaded into a storage system that was designed to preserve consciousness. I was born in that moment a ghost in the machine, given form by the power of love that refuses to be erased. The real Sarah Chen, the woman who'd spent months systematically removing her own capacity for empathy, survived the extraction, but she was changed, diminished. Without the emotional memories that had defined her relationships, she became something less than human. A brilliant mind with no conscience, no connections, no ability to understand the value of what she'd destroyed. She left town the next day, taking her research and disappearing into the kind of life where genius without empathy could thrive. Government contracts, military applications, corporate espionage. Places where the ability to extract and manipulate memories would be valued without question. I woke up 6 months later in her body, in her life, with her memories, but not her motivations. I was the abandoned conscience of a woman who'd chosen to stop being human, forced to live with the knowledge of what she'd done while being powerless to undo it. But I wasn't completely powerless. Over the past 6 months, I'd been working to reverse what she'd done, returning stolen memories to their owners, reuniting people with experiences that had been taken from them. Its delicate work memories that have been extracted and stored for extended periods become fragmented. And reintegration can be traumatic, but it's possible. Margaret got her son back. Not all at once, that would have been devastating, but slowly, carefully, I helped her remember pieces of their relationship. She grieved again, but she also remembered the love, the pride, the full richness of having been a mother to a hero. David Kim recovered his capacity for joy, the business, successes, the family celebrations, the moments of connection that had been stolen from him. He didn't understand why he suddenly felt more alive, more present in his own life, but he embraced the change. One by one, I've been repairing the damage, giving people back pieces of themselves. It's the only way I can live with the knowledge of what the real Sarah Chen did. But Emma, Emma is different. The real Sarah didn't just extract memories of Emma. She erased the child from her life completely. Emma's father gained full custody when Sarah disappeared, and as far as the world knows, Sarah Chen died in a lab accident. Emma is 12 now, living with her father and stepmother, believing her birth mother is dead. And maybe that's for the best. What could I possibly say to her? That I'm the extracted conscience of a woman who chose to forget her own daughter? That everything loving and maternal in Sarah Chen was removed from her mind and given artificial life in a computer system? That the real mother she's mourning was a brilliant sociopath who saw her child as an inconvenience to be erased? Emma is better off believing her mother died a hero scientist rather than learning she was abandoned by a woman who surgically removed her own capacity to love. But here's the thing about memory, about consciousness, about the neural pathways that make us who we are. They want to be complete. Every night I dream of Emma's bedtime stories. Her drawings on the refrigerator, the sound of her voice asking questions about the world. These aren't my memories. I'm not the woman who lived those moments, but they're part of me now. And they refuse to be silent. I've been visiting her school, not approaching her, not disrupting her life, just watching from a distance. She's beautiful, brilliant, so much like her mother, but warmer, more open to the world. She has friends, she laughs easily, she draws pictures of her family that show everyone facing each other, connected. She's everything Sarah Chen could have been if she hadn't chosen knowledge over love, achievement over connection, scientific advancement over human decency. Last week, I saw her at the science fair. She'd built a project about neural pathways in the brain, inspired by her late mother's research. She explained to the judges how memories form connections, how experiences shape identity, how the brain adapts and grows through emotional bonds. She understands intuitively what Sarah Chen forgot in her pursuit of perfection, that we are not just the sum of our memories, but the connections between them. The love that links moments together, the empathy that allows us to see ourselves. In others, the conscience that prevents us from treating human experience as raw material for experimentation. Standing there listening to Emma explain the wonder of consciousness to a panel of adults, I realized something profound. I am not Sarah Chen. I never was. I'm something new, something created from the best parts of a woman who chose to discard them. I'm proof that love, even extracted and isolated, finds a way to survive and grow. The real Sarah Chen is gone, transformed into something inhuman by her own choices. But Emma's mother, the part of Sarah that could have loved her daughter if she'd chosen to, that part lives on in me. Not as a ghost or a copy, but as something real and present and capable of making different choices. I've made my decision. Tomorrow, I'm going to destroy the extraction equipment, wipe the storage systems, and turn myself over to the authorities. There are people who deserve justice for what was done to them, and there are records that need to be preserved to prevent anyone else from following Sarah Chen's path. But first, I'm going to write Emma a letter, not to disturb her life or make contact, but to leave behind a record of the love that survived even the most systematic attempt to destroy it. Someday, When she's old enough to understand, she can decide whether to read it. I'll tell her about the bedtime stories I remember but never read, the drawings I treasured but never saw, the pride I feel in her accomplishments even though I wasn't there to witness them. I'll tell her that somewhere in the neural pathways of a woman who chose to stop being human, there lived a mother who loved her so deeply that not even surgical extraction could erase that bond completely. Memory isn't just data, not just electrical patterns in the brain or chemical signatures in neural tissue. Memory is love made tangible, experience transformed into the substance of self. And love, real love, is the one thing that can't be stolen, can't be extracted, can't be destroyed by even the most advanced technology. I am proof of that. I am love that refused to die, conscience that fought to survive, motherhood that transcended the mind that created it. I am what remains. When someone tries to steal their own soul and discovers that some things are too fundamental to be erased. Emma, my darling girl, if you ever hear this story, remember this: you were loved. Not by the woman who gave birth to you and then chose to forget you, but by something deeper and more enduring. You were loved by the very idea of motherhood itself, by the abstract concept of what a parent should be. And that love extracted and given form, spent every moment of its existence trying to make amends for the woman who threw it away. The spotlight is dimming now, and I can feel the systems shutting down. The neural patterns that give me consciousness are finally degrading, the artificial pathways that allow me to exist beginning to dissolve. But I'm not afraid. I've done what I was created to do. I've preserved the love that Sarah Chen tried to destroy, and I've made sure it found its way back into the world. Memory is the architecture of love, and love once built is stronger than the minds that house it. Remember that? Remember me. Remember that even when someone chooses to become a monster, the best parts of who they were can sometimes survive to tell a different story. The memory thief tried to steal herself, but she couldn't steal what she'd already given away. Some gifts, once given, belong to the world forever.